Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening to the podcast from. Welcome back to another video where it is, of course, the 2025 Belgian Grand Prix review, in which Oscar Piastri has further cemented his championship lead over his teammate with a rather dominant win around Spa. A track I love, but it seemed that maybe, and we'll get onto this later, Formula One has kind of outgrown it. Not down to Formula One in general, but the cars that we have right now. But regardless, it was supposed to be shaping up to be a very, very, I suppose, interesting race with the rain coming in. However, it seems that we didn't get much rain due to the fact that the FIA delayed the start of the race by an hour and 20 minutes, which was a heck of a time. And in that time, we pretty much missed two storms, which could have really spiced things up. Of course, I know about safety. I know how dangerous it is around Spa. Anyway, regardless if it's in the wet or not. But it was a little bit of a shame to see the drivers not be able to kind of maximize their own talent and their own capability in those type of conditions. We've seen it before. We look at somewhere like Brazil 24. That was an absolutely chaotic race. Why? Because of the rain. The rain is, as many say, the great equalizer, and it really gives those teams that maybe have better drivers but worse cars a chance to really score some decent points, if not a podium. But regardless, the race itself was pretty diabolical. There was really not much to talk about aside from McLaren's, because overtaking in the wet is probably easier than it was in the dry, and because we had the race in the dry, it was pretty much single file for the most of the Grand Prix. There wasn't much strategy involved because the first, I suppose, stint was the first quarter of the race was done on the intermediates, and from then on, put on the mediums all the way to the end, unless you're Lando Norris, and see those through. But we do have still a fair amount to talk about. Let's talk about the delayed start then, because we're already rambling on about that already. So, picture the scene. It is Sunday afternoon. The Formula 3 race has been delayed. The Formula 2 race had stoppages. The Porsche Super Cup had stoppages. So, you're already feeling hype, ready to go to see F1 drivers in the wet around Spa. Iconic. It's something that Spa has always had. It is a microclimate in the Ardennes Forest. And even in the summer, there's pretty much rain a guarantee for the weekend. So, when it starts to pour in Spa with around 20 minutes to go before lights out, I was really hyped. I was really excited to see what was going to happen. But, to my dismay, there is, on the top of the screen, formation lap will start behind the safety car, which, as you all know, that means that it is realistically going to be a red flag. By the time they get to the second sector, it is a red flag, which means that the drivers have to wait. Now, that is all okay, because at that time, yes, it was absolutely fairly torrential downpour. So, giving credit to the FIA, it was too dangerous to race then. However, within about 10 minutes, the rain stops completely, which means, for me, the green light should be on in an instant. However, the FIA were really worried about another storm that was inbound 20 minutes after the first storm ended. Personally, I would say it would be better to get racing laps done, regardless if there was a storm or not coming, and then maybe under the safety car, red flag it again. That would be my point of view, and now people could say, oh yes, but they really didn't want the second storm to really catch out drivers, in this difficult track. They've had no wet sessions throughout the weekend. But then, to my defense, I would probably recommend the FIA to at least do some laps under the safety car. They can count towards the race, but doing laps behind the safety car will mean that the drivers clear water and get a better understanding of the conditions, which means that without the red flag, it could have been go, go, go. As soon as the rain stopped, we could have got, if those 20 minutes, maybe about 10, 11 laps, maybe even more, about a quarter of the race distance done. And then from then on, you can make a decision. The FIA cannot, for me personally, base a decision about stuff in the future, which may not or may even happen. So, we went back into the pit lane. We waited an hour and 20 until lights out. Which was, I believe, 4:30 local time, which is fairly late in the afternoon in Belgium. we have the race, and as the second storm stopped, it was pretty much blue skies, which means that the track within 10 laps was suitable for slicks, which means that they could have gone on to the slick tyres, which really ruined any chance of any jeopardy or at least any overtaking, because in the wet you can overtake in Spa, which really was a shame, because whilst it got dry, it was single file until the checkered flag. Is it a case that Formula 1 has just... And we have this conversation from time to time. If we look at last year's Grand Prix in Spa, it was pretty much the same question. Has Formula 1 outgrown Spa? Yes, with these cars. Formula 1 has proved in the past, if we're looking at the smaller and skinnier cars, that in all honesty, you can have a fairly good race around Spa because the cars are small. The cars are small, you can overtake easier, and also they're fairly slower. However, with these big chunky cars, it seems that overtaking is sparse, and we see it with older tracks like even Suzuka, for example, where it is very twisty and windy, and it's more of a driver's circuit because it's a fun track to drive, not necessarily to overtake. Realistically, you have one in the dry, you have one overtaking spot, or maybe two. You got two overtaking spots from La Source all the way to Le Com down Camel Straight, or to the bus stop chicane on the back straight past Bonchemont from Stavelot. If you don't manage to get those drivers in those two corners, then you're pretty much ruined. And with no strategy giving any sort of, I suppose, spice to the mix, it was a pretty straightforward race, which was a shame to see, because people were hyping up to be a very good race. So was I, because the weather was, gearing towards that. But hey ho, we moved to Budapest where it's like 35 degrees, so definitely no rain for that. But we do have another talking point coming out of the race, and this is more for the driving. Piastri versus Norris, the two championship protagonists going against each other once again, this time one coming out on top of the other in considerable fashion. Well, it was going to be all smooth sailing for Lando Norris until he had the race. Because by the time the green flag was in, Lando Norris decided to start pushing after the safety car pulled in fairly early. And I mean really early, to be fair. Near Blanchimont early. Which, for me, was not the best idea, because you still have a heck of a way to go in the wet, and the slipstream can be really powerful around Spa, as we've seen before. But Lando Norris, by the time he hits the brakes at Le Com, was overtaken by his teammate, and Piastri went and set sailed to his victory eventually. But that was a really poor move from Lando. Yes, he was complaining about battery, but regardless, his racecraft was fairly poor, and it seemed that I suppose storyline continued throughout the Grand Prix. Of course, we get to the time where is the time to move to slicks. Norris chooses the mediums chooses the hards a lap later because they were too close to pit to double stack, whilst Piastri chose the mediums, and so by the time Lando comes out the pit lane a whole lap later than the others are pitted, he's about 10 odd seconds behind his teammate on harder tyres. Now, we had to, I suppose, call which Piastri was in charge of do we go for a 2-stop or a 1-stop? Can you hang on to those mediums? Because Norris was going to be definitely 1-stop. It is the hardest compound, the C1. But for Piastri, it was, can you hold on to these mediums? If so, it would be really beneficial, because you've got a chance to fight for the win. Unfortunately, it seemed that Lando Norris had a lot of work to do, as Piastri said near the halfway point, that I am going to hang on to the mediums. So Norris had to manually chase him down, and he was making indents to his teammate, as expected, because he was on fresher tyres and it was on a harder compound, which degraded a lot less significantly than the mediums. However, it seemed that mistakes yet again crept in to his racecraft, a lock up here, lock up there, going off the track at P1, which really did hinder his progress. He was making superb progress, taking about 4 or 5 tenths out of his teammate every lap, which he needed to do. He was on track to chase him down to the checkered flag. However, it seemed that he was making too many mistakes, which would set him half a second back, 1.5 seconds back. So by the time he got to the lap around 40, with 4 laps to go, he still had about 6 seconds to chase down to his teammate, which, as a world champion, and to be a world champion, you cannot afford to do. And that's what separates a champion from a great driver. A great driver is great, however, a world champion is absolutely flawless when it comes down to the business. You look at Verstappen, you look at Hamilton, you look at Schumacher, you look at Senna. When they were asked to go and perform, and Piastri in that sort of sense yesterday, when they are asked to do a task, they can put qualifying laps after qualifying lap after qualifying lap after qualifying lap without any flaw whatsoever, which is why they're champions. This is why they are the best at what they do. But with Norris, it seems like he kind of lacks that sort of, I suppose, tenacity in that sort of sense. Looking up there, it seemed almost reckless. He seemed almost chaotic. He seemed almost too frazzled out there. Yes, he won the sprint, but the main points do come in on a Sunday. And now he's 16 points behind his teammate, where he should have been, and he had the chance to be 2 points behind his teammate, which could have made the difference so much. But he has 16 points with a lot of work to do, and I'm sure he'll be looking to Hungary, which he has done quite well in Budapest, to try and claw back that deficit. Ferrari have also had a topsy-turvy weekend. You had one driver absolutely flawless, getting maximum out of the car, whilst another driver is struggling to get out of Q1, not once but twice in a single weekend. Leclerc was, for me, one of the, if not the best drivers of the weekend. Absolutely flawless. P4 in the sprint race, P3 in qualifying, and P3 in the main race. So he was best of the rest in that sort of sense. But it seems that his teammate, on the other hand, had a hell of a weekend, especially in the sprint races and in qualifying. Both sprint qualifying and the qualifying for the main race, and not eliminated out of Q1. Once for the sprint qualifying for sliding out, like locking up his brakes and just spinning off at the bus stop chicane. A very rookie error, I would say, something you wouldn't really see. And even he said himself that he's never locked the rear brakes, which shows that he's really struggling with that car. You also have in Q1 track limits at Radion at the top of the hill, which meant his lap time was deleted, which meant they had a lot of work to do in both the races. In the sprint race, he didn't really seem to do much. However, in the main race, he made the right call with his team to go onto the slicks a lap earlier than everyone else. He maximised his opportunity and was up to P7 after the first pit stops. Couldn't really get past Albon for P6, but regardless, the P7 from the pit lane is a very impressive, I suppose, performance. It would have kind of, really showed that if he was to qualify just even normally in P5, P6, he could have made so much progress. He could have been there or thereabouts on the podium, and it does show that Ferrari do have the potential in that car. It seems that this weekend they were the second best car, Verstappen being the only outlier in that sense. So it shows that Leclerc is, I suppose, a good marker to show that if Lewis gets his car knuckled down and he's on top of it and feels comfortable with it, the car is there to produce very good performances like a podium. And Leclerc also, his racecraft on Sunday was quite impressive. Managed to hold off Max in the wet, which I don't think many people can do. I think maybe only he can do, because he's been racing with him for a heck of a long time. But it seems that the pace is there for Ferrari. It's just the difficulty is unlocking unlocking the pace. Lack of overtaking we've already talked about. Spa is a great circuit to drive. However, the cars really do need to change. I'm hoping this is the last time I say it, because in 26 we will get slightly smaller cars, but it still shows that it is very, very difficult to overtake, and maybe not the best for racing. Qualifying, exceptional there. I really enjoy qualifying, but race, yeah, it's difficult, which we saw in the sprint. The sprint was a perfect example of how to really maximize a racecraft in a short amount of time in a sprint. But you had someone like Verstappen who had probably a better straight line speed setup, qualified P3 or P2 in sprint, got the job done by the time he got to Le Mans by absolutely abusing his ERS system and the slipstream. By the time they get to Le Mans, he overtakes Piastri around the outside, and from then on he can really manage and control the race. He knows that overtaking is very difficult. In the second sector, you can't really overtake at all. So in the straights, all you need to do is just deploy and break a toe. That's all he had to do. And for those 15 laps, he managed to execute it perfectly, which shows that racecraft is also still a very important factor in, I suppose, in Formula 1 in general. Let's go to predictions now. Okay. Alright, qualifying, I said Piastri. Oh, sprint qualifying, I put a Norris, Russell, Piastri top 3, which was absolutely wrong, because Piastri got sprint pole, Max was in P2 and Lando was in P3. Sprint race, I put Norris, Russell, Verstappen, which is wrong, because Max came first, Piastri came second, and Norris came third. Qualifying, I put Piastri on pole, which did not happen. Lando was on pole. Put Norris to come second, which did not happen. Verstappen to come third, he qualified P4. Russell to come fourth, he qualified P6, I believe. And Leclerc P5, he actually qualified third. Race, I put Lando Norris to win, which he did not. Verstappen to be P2, he did not. Piastri to be P3, which he did. Leclerc to be P3, which he did. And I'm just going to double check who came P4, because that was not Piastri. And I've put George Russell to be P5. Which I'm just checking now on the app. Oh, George Russell did come P5. So that's 2 points in the race for me. In the middle of the race, I put that Russell, Piastri, Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris. That was not true. The middle of the race was Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell. Nope, none of them. Piastri, Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell. Piastri, Norris. Nope. Biggest price Ferrari. I'm going to say Ferrari, because it shows that they do have, yes, Lewis did not perform the best, but it shows that they do have pace in that car, which they can unlock for sure. Biggest fault Piastri, that did not come into play at all. Credit prediction, 2 red flags in the Grand Prix and the sprint. That did not happen at all, which I was counting on if there was rain, which did not happen again, which is great. Which leaves me with 1, 2, 3, 4 points out of the 15. Out of the 27 points I could get. That is a fairly average weekend from Belgium. Okay, moving on to now the championship. Championship at the front, as I said before, it has now extended the gap between the two McLaren drivers, the two Papaya boys, by 16 points. As Verstappen and Russell are further and further away. I think they're nearly 70 points behind both of them, which shows that maybe, yes, the championship for Verstappen is over. It is now, an interesting fact is that the middle of the midfield is getting closer with one another, because from 11th, which is Hajar, to 16th, which is Sainz, the gap is only 6 points between 6 drivers, which is fairly interesting. 6 points between 6 drivers, so it is very competitive in the midfield, as Colapinto is the only current driver to not score a single point just yet. In the constructors now, and McLaren further extend their championship, lead to 516 points, as Ferrari and Mercedes are only separated by 28 points, with 248 and 220. Further down the pack, and Kick, Sauber and Racing Bulls are separated by 2 points in 6th and 7th, as 8th and 9th of Aston Martin and Haas are separated by only 1 point, with Alpine still 15 points behind the rest in 10th. Drivers of the day now. Who would I say is my driver of the day? I'll say team-wise McLaren. McLaren won to their 6th of the season, which is fairly impressive. Dominated. I mean, they were still 15 odd seconds down the road compared to everyone else, so it shows that they do have a lot of pace, and they managed to execute perfectly today at 1-2, and it shows that they are the team to beat still. I'll say my next driver of the day is Max. Yes, he didn't win. Yes, he didn't get podium. However, a very strong race in that sense. Sprint win and a P4 is something he would take compared to the last couple of races he's had. Yes, this is the first time since 2019 he has had the most races without a podium in a row. But nonetheless, a still very dominant weekend. Very strong, solid weekend. Leclerc would be also my next driver of the day. Qualified P3, managed to hold off Max in the race. Superb driving, shows that he was the best of the rest compared to McLaren. Further kind of cements that maybe he's right now currently the stronger driver in that Ferrari lineup, which is a big feat considering he is paired up against a 7-time champion of the world. Flops of the week, and Antonelli. Antonelli has to be my biggest flop of the week. Poor in qualifying, in all qualifying, didn't get out just based on pure luck and pure talent. In the race, didn't do much in both the sprint and the main Grand Prix. Seems that even on his onboards, he was struggling severely with understeer, oversteer, grip in general, and really just wasn't on top of what he can do. Hopefully this is just a slump, but still, he's struggling out there for sure. Hamilton also has to be the next driver. Both of those drivers eliminated, both out of Q1, double Q1 eliminations for both of them this weekend. If Hamilton, I think it was a coulda, woulda, shoulda for Hamilton. He had the capability to, be quicker than those at the top, and if his qualifying was better in the main Grand Prix, he could have done so much more. A podium could have been, I suppose, a possibility. However, just didn't maximize his qualifying, which meant that in the race he was kind of screwed. But regardless, a very tough pill to swallow this weekend. Aston Martin have also been a really poor team. Qualified 19th and 20th in hope of a wet race because they geared their car towards a wet race. Nonetheless, it was a dry race, so they really struggled out there at the bottom of the pack. When everyone else is scoring, it is, a little bit of an annoyance. Haas scored double points in the sprint, which meant that they are now 1 point ahead of Haas for P8, which is a little bit of a worry for the Silverstone team. Anyway, I think that's going to wrap up the 2025 Belgian Grand Prix review. Make sure to like and subscribe and have a simply lovely day. Goodbye.